The rain fell like a courtesan's tears, pretty, performative, and ultimately meaningless. Kagero Nagamori tilted her head back, letting the droplets trace the curve of her scarred throat before disappearing into the collar of her kosode. The silk clung to her skin, translucent in the lantern light, the deep indigo dye bleeding into the damp air like ink in water. She loosened the pin in her hair, letting the dark strands fall, wet and disheveled upon her shoulders. They always underestimated a woman who looked desperate, she mused, her fingers twitching at her wrist, where the Ito Nowa, her wire bracelet, lay coiled beneath the delicate embroidery of cherry blossoms. A gift from Madame Wren, who had once told her, "The best weapons are the ones they never see coming." And oh, how right she was. The ryokan loomed ahead, its wooden beams groaning under the weight of the storm. Yoshiwara's pleasure district was a beast with many teeth, and tonight, Kagero was its fangs. She adjusted the obi at her waist, letting it hang just a little too loose, as if she were a woman who had nothing to hide, as if she were prey. Let him think that. Let him think he's the hunter. Magistrate Hideo was exactly as the guild scrolls had described. A bloated toad of a man, face like a misshapen mochi, and hands that wandered like drunken samurai. He sat at the low table in his private chamber, a pipe of opium smoldering between his fingers, his gaze already undressing her before she'd even knelt. "Ah, Suki," he slurred, addressing her by the false identity she'd established over the past few nights. It was the name Kagero always used on missions that ended in blood. "I've heard such delicate things about you." Kagero kept her eyes downcast, the picture of modesty. But in her mind she was assessing. 3 guards outside, one by the door, a dagger in his boot, poorly hidden. A man who relied on others to keep him safe. She let her lower lip tremble. I was told you were a man of refined tastes, Sama." Hideo chuckled, the sound wet and greedy. "Oh, I am. And you, little flower, are exactly to my taste." His hand shot out, gripping her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. She let her breath hitch, let her body go pliant beneath his touch. Good. Let him think she was afraid. Let him think she was just another Joro with a price. "Tell me," he murmured, his thumb brushing her mouth, "do you scream when you're pleased?" Kagero didn't answer. Instead, she grinned suggestively, letting her fingers drift to the ties of her kosode and loosening them just enough to tease. The fabric parted, revealing the pale slope of her shoulder, the faintest shadow of her collarbone. Hideo's pupils dilated. There it was, she thought with a grin, the moment their guard drops completely, never suspecting that death was just a brief, climactic moment away. The bath was already drawn, steam curling from the surface like the breath of some slumbering beast. Hideo wasted no time. His hands were on her the moment the screen slid shut, his mouth crushing against hers with the finesse of a starving dog. Kagero let him push her into the water, let him groan against her skin as his fingers dug into her hips. Pathetic, she thought, even as she arched into his touch, her own hand sliding up his back in a lover's caress. They were all the same, greedy, stupid, easy. She straddled him, the water sloshing around them, her thighs slick against his. His breath came in ragged gasps, his hands fumbling at her breasts, her waist, as if he could possess her through sheer force of want. Kagero tilted her head back, letting her hair trail in the water like black silk, her fingers tracing the nape of his neck. Right there. That's the spot. Hideo moaned, his hips jerking against hers. Oh God, you're so fucking His words were cut short as Kagero struck without warning. Her left hand snapped up, the Ito no wa uncoiling from her wrist in a single fluid motion. The wire glinted, just for a heartbeat, before she looped it around his throat and pulled. Hideo's eyes bulged. His hands flew to his neck, claws scraping at the thin line of metal buried in the wire, the one that made it slice like a whisper. Kagero didn't stop. She rode him harder, her body moving in a rhythm that was half fucking, half murder, her own pleasure building as his face turned purple. Hideo's tiny member began twitching inside her as his body betrayed him one last time. Good boy, she purred, her voice a velvet blade against his ear. Now, come for me. And he did. His release was a wet, choking thing, his body convulsing as the wire bit deeper, blood frothing at the corners of his lips. Kagero leaned in, her own climax crashing over her as she watched the light die in his eyes. There it was, that moment, that beautiful, fragile second where they realize they've been fucked in more ways than one. She held him there like a fleshy saddle between her legs, his corpse still twitching against her, his seed spilling between them like a posthumous offering. For a moment, she let herself pretend it was something else, something real. Then the moment passed. She exhaled, unwinding the wire from his throat with a practiced flick of her wrist. The water around them was pink now, his blood diffusing like dye. She eased off him, letting his body slump beneath the surface, his face frozen in an expression of slack-jawed ecstasy. Another one for the Lotus. She dressed slowly, her movements methodical, clinical. The kosode was ruined, she'd have to burn it, but the Ito no wa was pristine, coiling back around her wrist like a serpent returning to its den. She found Hideo's ledger in a locked chest. The key had been in his boot, just where she'd guessed. The pages filled with names and sums, the evidence of his greed written in his own hand. Kagero flipped through it, her lips curling. So many lives ruined for a few coins, so many widows, so many orphans. She should feel nothing. She always felt nothing. But tonight, as she removed a single page from the ledger and tucked it into her sleeve, her fingers lingered on the paper. Her mind flickered. A memory, half buried, of another ledger. Another victim, another night where the wire had sung and the blood had flowed. Stop it, she snapped at herself. shaking her head. He deserved it. Suki deserved it. They all deserve it. But the thought clung to her, stubborn as a scar. She lit a candle, holding the ledger over the flame. The edges blackened, curled, then caught, the fire licking at the names like a hungry beast. Kagero watched it burn, her face impassive. No one will miss him, she mused, tossing the candle to the floor, flames spreading as she silently stepped out into the wet night. The streets of Yoshiwara were quieter now, the rain having washed away the revelers, leaving only the drunks and the desperate. Kagero moved like a shadow, barely making a sound on the wet stones. She could already taste the sake waiting for her at the guild, the way Madame Wren would arch a brow and say, "Another one, Kagero? You're insatiable." And she was. But tonight, for the first time in years, she found herself hesitating outside the tea house that served as the Crimson Lotus's front. The lanterns swung gently in the breeze, their light warm, inviting. Inside, her sisters would be waiting, Hanabi with her poisons, Kasumi with her silence, all of them beautiful and deadly, and alive in a way Kagero wasn't sure she still was. She closed her eyes, her fingers brushing the thin scar around her neck. What if... No. Kagero's eyes snapped open, her jaw setting as she coiled her crimson scarf around the scar. No what-ifs. No weaknesses. She approached the door, her stride becoming more purposeful with each step. The scent of jasmine tea and perfume greeted her like a loving family. The tea house, despite the comfort of its company, was a gilded cage, its paper screens painted with scenes of cranes and willows, its air thick with the scent of sencha and something darker, belladonna perhaps, or the faint metallic tang of Hanabi's latest concoction. Kagero slid the door open with her hip, her damp kosode clinging to her skin like a second layer. The chatter inside died for half a breath as the sultry assassins turned to look at her. Kasumi, perched on the edge of a tatami mat, didn't speak. She never did, but her dark eyes gleamed in approval. Hanabi, lounging against a pillar with a cup of wine, smirked. Back so soon? He must not have been to your liking. Kagero flicked water from her sleeve onto the irori hearth, the hot stones hissing in response. His blood was too pink, like the water surrounding it. A ripple of laughter. Even Madame Wren, seated at the head of the low table, allowed herself a small, knowing smile. The guild's matron was a vision in crimson silk, her black and silver hair coiled with a jade hairpin, her face still so flawless it seemed carved from ivory. "Kagero," she purred, always leaving a mess for someone else to clean. "I left the body in the bath," she replied, dropping onto the cushion beside her, "which has burned along with the rest of his house by now." Hanabi snorted. "You're vicious. And you're jealous." Kagero reached for the sake bottle, her fingers brushing Ren's as she took it. The older woman's touch lingered, always lingering, and Kagero didn't pull away. She never did. Kasumi signed something with her hands, elegant, efficient, as always, and Hanabi translated. She says you're wasted on men like Hideo. You should be hunting shogunate officials, not fat merchants. Kagero took a slow sip, the rice wine warm on her tongue. Fat merchants pay better. And taste worse, Ren murmured, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup, gaze heavy upon her prized assassin. But then, you've never been one for discernment. Kagero met her gaze, unflinching. I discern just fine. I just don't care. Another laugh, sharper this time. The women of the Crimson Lotus were like sisters to her, the only sisters she had left. Ren's hand found her knee beneath the table. You're dripping on my floor, child. Then stop sitting so close. Where's the fun in that? Kagero didn't answer. Instead, she just leaned back into the touch, letting Madame Ren's fingers stray upward. Later, when the others had dispersed, Hanabi to her poisons, Kasumi to the shadows, the younger girls to their training, Ren called Kagero to her private chambers. The room was a shrine to indulgence. Silk hangings from Nara, a byobu screen painted with scenes of the tale of Genji, a bed large enough for 4 and often occupied by as many. Ren reclined on a pile of cushions, her kosode parted just enough to tease the curves of her breasts. Sit, she commanded, patting the space beside her. Kagero obeyed, though she made a show of wiping her damp sleeves on the tatami first. You're in a mood. Aren't I always? Ren's fingers found her wrist, tracing the ito no wa beneath her sleeve. You didn't stain my gift, did you? No, she assured. I was in the shower, remember? His blood washed right out. The seasoned matron uncoiled the weapon, gliding her tongue over the sharp edge as she checked for herself. Do you ever use anything else? Why would I? Kagero turned her hand, letting the wire recoil in a deadly whisper. It's quiet. It's intimate. And it hurts. Well, you would know. Ren's lips parted as she removed the crimson silk that covered Kagero's neck. You're just like me, she cooed, affectionately kissing the wound hidden beneath the soft fabric. No, the younger assassin insisted. I'm better. Silence lingered between them. Then Ren laughed, low and rich, before pulling her into a kiss. Kagero let it happen. However, she didn't lean into it like she used to. Ren's mouth was warm, her tongue insistent, tasting of ume wine and something darker, opium maybe, or the ghost of all the men she'd killed. Kagero didn't kiss back, but she didn't pull away either. It was easier this way. Easier than arguing, easier than feeling. When Ren finally broke away, her breath was unsteady. You're cold tonight. I'm always cold. Bullshit. Ren's fingers trailed down Kagero's throat, over the faint scar there, old, almost invisible, before dipping beneath the collar of her kosode. You burn like the rest of us. You just pretend you don't. Kagero caught her wrist, prying it away from her chest. Is there a point to this? Ren's smile was slow, dangerous. I was just thinking about your first kill. The air in the room shifted. Kagero went still. Oh, I don't. Is that so? Ren's voice dropped to a whisper. The samurai, the one who... Enough! Kagero spat, her glare sharp. Who bought you from your mother? Madame Ren finished with a grin. Kagero's fingers tightened around her matron's wrist, nails digging in. I said enough. Ren didn't flinch. You were so young, and yet you didn't even hesitate. He deserved it. They all do, Ren assured, her free hand tenderly cupping the younger woman's face. But you enjoyed it. That's what makes you special. That's what makes you like me. Kagero jerked away, her breath coming faster. I did what I had to. No, you did what you wanted. More silence, broken only by the cicadas singing outside. Kagero stared at the shoji screen, the paper thin enough to see the lanterns of the garden beyond. Why are you digging up ghosts? The madam's voice softened. Because one day you'll take my place, and I need to know you won't hesitate when the time comes. Kagero's laugh was sharp. Ha! You're barely preferable to my real mother. You think I'd spare you? No, Ren said. I think you'd make it beautiful. She looked back at her. The older woman's eyes were dark, hungry. You're mine, Kagero. Body and blade. She didn't answer, reaching instead for the sake bottle. Ren let her, though her hand stayed possessively on Kagero's thigh. One day, you'll thank me for all I've done for you. One day, you'll take my place, and my life along with it. Kagero took a long, slow drink, hoping that Ren's foresight amounted to no more than proverbs found in rice cookies. Later, when the madam slept, Kagero slipped from the bed and dressed in the dark. The Ito no wa coiled around her wrist like a vein. She paused at the door, looking back at Ren's still form, beautiful, dangerous, hers, for now. She stepped into the night. The guild's training courtyard was empty, the sand damp from the earlier rain. Kagero drew her wire, letting it unspool between her fingers. She moved through the forms Ren had taught her, silent, lethal, perfect, her breath steady, her body a deadly blur. Kagero continued her lethal dance until her arms ached and her muscles burned. And then she practiced some more, avoiding the comfort of Madame Ren's bed and the dreams that would inevitably haunt her slumber. The opium smoke curled like a living thing, filling the cramped Mizurashia with the scent of poppies and rot. Kagero stood in the doorway, her young hands clenched into fists, her tiny feet pressing into the splintered wood. You what? You sold me? Her mother didn't look up from her pipe. The woman's once beautiful face was hollow now, her cheeks sunken, her kosode stained with sake and sex. He paid in silver, girl. Real silver, not the copper scraps your father left us. Kagero's voice trembled, not with fear, but with something sharper. How could you? You're my mother. And you're my meal ticket, she croaked in response. Besides, you'll like him. He's a samurai, not some dirty merchant. He'll treat you right. Kagero remembered the way the man had looked at her, the way his fingers had twitched when her mother had pushed her forward, her thin yukata doing little to hide the buds of her breasts. Please, you can't do this. Go, her mother had snapped, shoving her toward the door, or I'll sell your little sister next. The memory shifted. Now she was in a ryokan, the paper screens trembling in the wind. The samurai she was sold to, Takeshi, sat across from her, his katana propped against the wall, his eyes dark with something that made her stomach clench. You're a pretty little thing, he murmured, pouring her sake. How old did you say you were? 15, she lied. He smiled. Good. I like them with some meat on their bones. The cup was in her hand. The liquid burned her throat. Drink up, he said, refilling it. We've got all night. His hand reached for her, fingers brushing against the collar of her obi. Then it slid below. She jolted upright, her breath ragged, her skin slick with sweat. Bad dream? Ren's voice was a purr in the dark. The older woman was propped up on one elbow, her other hand cupped possessively around Kagero's breast, her thumb circling the point with slow, deliberate pressure. Kagero didn't flinch, but couldn't contain a sigh of frustration. Ugh, you're worse than my ghosts, she muttered, knocking the woman's hand away. Ren only laughed, rich and melodious. Dreams are just memories with teeth, my beloved, and yours have fangs. Kagero swung her legs over the edge of the bed, her fingers already finding the Ito Noa on the nightstand. The wire was comforting against her skin. I don't dream. Liar. Ren's fingers trailed down her spine, tracing the petals of the Crimson Lotus tattoo she'd inked herself. You dream of him, the samurai. She stiffened as Ren's lips brushed her shoulder, gliding up slowly into a delicate kiss on the scar around her neck. I can smell him on you, even now. You're delusional. And you're dripping. Ren's hand slid between Kagero's thighs from behind, her fingers finding the slick heat there. See? Your body remembers what your mind won't. Kagero twisted away, but Ren caught her wrist, pulling her back. You just need a bath, she insisted, her voice sharp before dropping to its usual purr. Let me wash away your nightmares. The ofuro was already drawn, steam rising in lazy curls, the water scented with yuzu and wormwood. Ren knelt behind her, a wooden bucket in hand, her movements methodical as she poured warm water over Kagero's shoulders. You're to watch over Mika tonight, the madam began, her fingers working through Kagero's wet hair, massaging her scalp. It's her first kill. A merchant, fat, greedy, the usual. She's nervous and, like most of the girls here, she admires you. Maybe Even has a slight crush on you. Kagero leaned back into the touch, her eyes half-lidded. And you trust me to babysit? I trust you to make sure she doesn't hesitate. Ren reached for the soap, applying it gingerly to her wet skin. You remember our first, don't you? The time I convinced you to kill someone, the same way you killed Takeshi while I watched. Kagero's fingers twitched toward the heat growing between her legs. I remember, she said flatly. Ren's laugh was a dark chime. You lied to him, played the obedient little whore, let him fuck you while waiting for the sedative to take effect. Her hands dipped beneath the water, her fingers parting Kagero like a flower. And then you choked him with his own obi while he was still inside you. Her breath hitched as Ren's fingers found her center, stroking, not gentle, but probing, searching for the wet truth. Did you come, Kagero? Ren's voice was a whisper against her ear. When you felt his cock twitch as the life left him. Kagero's nails dug into the wood of the stool. Answer me, Ren demanded, her fingers probing more vigorously. Yes, she moaned. The madam's laugh was a victory. Good girl. She withdrew her hand, leaving Kagero trembling, her body betraying her. Now get yourself ready for tonight, Ren demanded, standing abruptly, and make sure Mika learns from you. Not all of us are born with your talents. Kagero watched as her matron got dressed before departing, and she couldn't help but finish what the madam had started. The izakaya was loud, smoky, the air thick with the stench of sake and unwashed bodies. Kagero sat in the corner, her kosode plain, her face portraying the bored expression of a woman waiting for a lover. Mika was at the bar. The girl was young, too young, her hands shaking as she poured the merchant's drink, her kimono tied just a little too loose at the collar. Kagero recognized the look in her eyes, the same one she'd worn once, hungry, desperate, willing to do anything. The fat merchant, his sweaty fingers already creeping up Mika's thigh, leaned in. You're new here, aren't you? The girl giggled, the sound high and forced. Is it that obvious? Like a fresh plum, the man slurred, his hand sliding higher. I'd love to, have a taste. Kagero watched as the fat merchant pawed at Mika, his movements mirroring those of the samurai from so long ago. Her mind flickered, and she felt Takeshi's hands upon her once more, felt his breath hot against her neck, the way he'd laughed when she'd spilled sake on her kimono, his fingers eager as he helped her undress. You're tense, little flower, he'd murmured. Let me help you. Kagero snapped back to the present as the merchant stood, pulling Mika with him. Let's take this upstairs, eh? I'll pay you extra, he bellowed. Mika glanced toward her just for a second before nodding, letting the man lead her toward the stairs. Kagero waited a moment, finishing her drink. Then she followed. The paper-thin walls of the upstairs brothel did little to muffle the sounds within. Kagero pressed her ear against the wooden frame as Mika's nervous giggle filtered through. More sake, my lord? The girl's voice trembled. Kagero closed her eyes as Mika's words echoed her own plea from years ago. More sake, Takeshi-sama. Her own voice had been steadier, even at 15. She'd been traveling with the samurai for 2 years at that point, and that was the night Kagero had decided she'd finally had enough. The flask had felt heavy in her hands, the white powder dissolving invisibly as she poured. Meanwhile, inside the room, bedding rustled. The merchant's voice grew thick with lust. "Come here, little flower. Let me see what I've paid for." Kagero's eyes remained closed, her brow still twitching in recollection. Takeshi's hands had been calloused when they'd pushed her kimono from her shoulders. "Such a pretty little thing," he'd murmured. "Worth every coin." A moan drifted through the wall. Mika's, practiced but unconvincing. A slap of flesh followed, painful, provocative. Kagero's fingers drifted to her throat, to the thin, silvery line that encircled it like a necklace. Her pulse quickened beneath the scar, and once again she found herself reliving the past. She'd felt dizzy as Takeshi's weight pressed her into the futon, his movements growing erratic as the drug took hold. "Something wrong with the sake?" she'd whispered, watching his pupils dilate. He'd frowned, then smiled malevolently. "Clever girl," he'd slurred, "but not clever enough." The wire had appeared from nowhere, thin as a hair, biting into her flesh before she could scream. Her vision darkened at the edges as he pulled tighter. "Your mother warned me you might be trouble." Mika's target groaned loudly, breaking Kagero from her reverie. "Fuck yes, just like that." Kagero's breath caught. A single drop of sweat traced the curve of her brow as she closed her eyes, willing herself to return to that moment, just so she could watch him die again. She'd clawed at the wire, lungs burning, Takeshi's face swimming above her. But his movements had grown sluggish, his grip weakening. "What did you—" The samurai's words slurred together as the drug flooded his system. With her last breath, she'd twisted on top of him, her hands finding his obi. One sharp tug and the silken sash came free. Her vision spotted with black as she looped it around the samurai's neck and pulled. His grip on the Ito Noir faltered completely, and the thin wire fell from her throat. "Is this how you like it?" It was now Mika's voice from inside the room that penetrated the memory, stronger now, confident, just like hers had been. Kagero's lips curved into a smile as she heard the merchant's breath catch, not in pleasure, but in surprise, then fear. "Is this how you like it?" She'd screamed at Takeshi as she tightened the obi, watching his eyes bulge, feeling him, still hard inside her, as his life ebbed away. His last thrust had been involuntary, his body convulsing as she'd squeezed tighter, his release coming just as the light left his eyes. Kagero let go of the memory as a wet gurgle replaced the merchant's moans from inside the room. She nodded in silent approval. The merchant was dead. Mika had done well. The silence that followed was almost sacred. Kagero slid the door open without knocking. The merchant lay sprawled across the futon, his face a sickly prune, tongue protruding like a bloated mushroom. Mika was still straddled on top, kosode hanging open, hair wild, her hands still gripping the silken scarf that had sent him to whatever hell awaited men like him. The girl's eyes snapped up, wide, glassy, her chest heaving. "I did it," Mika whispered. "I actually... Her words caught in her throat and seemed to ripple down her hips. I killed him." Kagero stepped inside, sliding the door shut behind her. "Congratulations. Now comes the hard part." "Oh? What's that?" Mika asked, her thighs still dripping. "Getting rid of the body." For the next few minutes, they worked in silence, methodical and efficient. Kagero had done this 100 times, wrapping the body in the stained futon, binding it with the merchant's own obi, checking for blood splatter on the walls. There was surprisingly little. Mika had been clean, precise. "You used the scarf," Kagero observed, holding up the silk. "Not the wire." Mika flushed. I forgot it. When he grabbed me, I just improvised." Kagero's lips curved. "That's good. It means you can think on your feet." The girl's face brightened, her shoulders straightening with pride. "Really?" "Yes." Kagero paused, her gaze fixed on the silk obi in her hands. The realization came at once. All the ways Mika's first kill mirrored her own. She couldn't help but grin, recalling the girl's wet joy from strangling the merchant. "Exactly as I would have done it myself," she assured the young initiate. They hauled the body through the back corridor. The izakaya owner had been paid well to look the other way, and into the narrow alley where the rain still fell in sheets. The river wasn't far. Bodies disappeared there all the time. Drunks, gamblers, men who owed debts to the wrong people. One more wouldn't raise any eyebrows. They reached the riverbank, the water black and swollen from the storm. Together, they rolled the body in, watching as the current seized it, dragging it downstream into the dark. Mika stood there, transfixed, her breath misting in the cold. "Does it always feel this exciting?" "No," Kagero admitted with a breath, wiping her hands on her kosode. "But you stop caring about the thrill." The girl turned to her, rain streaming down her face, and for a moment Kagero saw herself, young, desperate, still foolish enough to think there was a way back. "I want to be like you," Mika admitted softly. Kagero barked a laugh. "No, you don't." "Yes, I do." The girl stepped closer, her eyes shining with something that went beyond respect, beyond admiration. You're everything I want to be. Strong, fearless. You don't let anyone touch you unless you want them to. You don't know anything about me. Then tell me." Mika's hand found hers in the moonlight, fingers lacing together. "Please, I want to know." Kagero wanted to pull away, wanted to remind the girl that sentiment was weakness, that attachment was a blade that only cut inward. But Mika's warm touch contrasted beautifully against the cold rain, and recent memories had left Kagero feeling vulnerable. My second kill, she heard herself say, was my mother. Mika's breath caught. She was easier than the samurai. Kagero continued, her voice flat, clinical. No need for seduction, no games. I just walked into that miserable shack she called home and found her passed out in her own vomit, the pipe still smoldering beside her. Kagero's heart raced, but not with regret. I'd hoped to find my sister there, to rescue her from this cycle of despair, but the house was empty save for my pathetic parody of a mother. The memory unfolded like a pressed flower, brittle, faded, but still sharp enough to draw blood. The opium smoke hung thick as ghosts. Kagero stood over her mother's prone form, the Ito no wa, her very first one, pried from Takeshi's dead hands, coiled around her wrist. Her mother stirred, eyes struggling to focus. Kagero? That you, girl? Yes, Suki. It's me. Good. I need... She interrupted herself with a wet cough. I need more coin. That samurai, he's still paying you? The question was automatic, uncaring. Kagero's chest tightened. He's dead. Suki's face twisted. Dead? You stupid whore! He was our... Where's Aiko? Kagero cut her off, her voice sharp as a knife. I came here to get my sister. Where is she? Did you sell her like you did me? Suki's gaze shifted, a flicker of something that resembled guilt or fear, but then she scoffed. Your sister? How should I know? I sent her to the merchant district over a month ago to earn some coin, and she never came back. That worthless little... She's just a child, you fucking bitch. Her heart sank. The thought of Aiko being abandoned brought bile to her throat. Then, the anger blossomed, hot and unyielding. The wire sang. She moved without thinking, the muscle memory of Takeshi's murder guiding her hands. She looped the Ito no wa around her mother's throat and pulled. Suki's eyes bulged, her hands scrabbling at her daughter's wrists. But the opium had made her slow, weak. Kagero watched her struggle, watched the light dim, and felt nothing. Die, you worthless bitch, Kagero hissed as the body went limp. That was for my sister. She'd taken what little coin remained hidden in the floorboards, along with her mother's only valuable possession, a jade hairpin, probably stolen. Then she'd set the shack ablaze. No one had bothered to investigate. Fires happened all the time in the slums. You killed your own mother, Mika breathed, not with horror, but with something like awe. She wasn't a mother. She was a parasite. Kagero's fingers tightened around Mika's. And parasites need to be cut out. What happened after that? After that, Kagero's jaw clenched, her gaze distant, as she recalled the events that had sharpened her into a blade. I lost everything. I lost my sister. For good. 1 month. That's how long the coin had lasted. 1 month of sleeping in shrines, stealing rice from temple offerings, watching her body grow gaunt, her ribs pressing against her skin like prison bars. She'd tried to find honest work, washing clothes, serving tea, all while searching for any sign of Aiko. Alas, she had no luck in either. Eventually, she'd heard disturbing news. The body of a girl was pulled from the river, young, Aiko's age, and Kagero was convinced it was her sister. Days later, she was contemplating the river, contemplating ridding herself of the burden of breath, when the woman in crimson silk had appeared. "You look half dead, child." Kagero had turned, ready to spit venom, but the words died on her chapped lips. The woman was beautiful, not in the painted, performative way of the courtesans, but in the way of a blade freshly sharpened, dangerous, perfect. "I'm fine," Kagero had lied. The woman's smile was knowing. "No, you're not. You're starving, desperate." She'd stepped closer, her perfume, jasmine and lotus, wrapping around Kagero like a noose. "And you've killed before." Kagero's eyes had widened, her hand absently moving to the ito no wa around her wrist, revealing the fresh scars on her hand. "I don't know what you—" "Don't lie to me." The woman's fingers had tilted her chin up, her gaze intense. "I can smell blood on you. Even now, dirty as you are, I can smell it in your pores." "Who are you?" "You will address me as Madame Wren, and I have a proposition." "She took me to the tea house that night," Kagero continued, her voice distant. "Fed me, bathed me, put silk on my skin for the first time since—" Mika squeezed her hand. "Since the samurai." "Yes." Kagero's throat tightened. "She was kind, gentle. She held me while I shook, told me I was safe now, that I'd never have to sell myself to survive again." That's the same thing the madam had told me," Mika admitted. "It's a lie." The rain drummed harder, as if the sky itself was weeping. "She trained me," Kagero went on. "Taught me every way to kill a man, how to use the ito no wa without cutting myself, how to read their weaknesses, how to make them beg before they died." Her voice cracked. "She gave me purpose, a family, a home." "Then why?" "Because she owns me, Mika. Owns you." Kagero finally pulled her hand away, wrapping her arms around herself. "Every kill I make, every coin I earn, every breath I take, it's all hers. She saved me from starvation, yes, but she also turned me into her perfect weapon, her successor, her possession." "You're mine now," Wren had whispered that first night, her fingers tracing the fresh scar on Kagero's throat. "Body and blade. Say it." "I'm yours," Kagero had purred, her submission genuine. "Good girl." The kiss that followed had been soft, possessive, and Kagero, starved for touch, for affection, for anything that felt like love, had kissed back. She had even gifted the madam with her only valuable possession, the jade hairpin stolen from her mother. In those first months together, Kagero had confided everything to her new matron. And so, by the time Madame Ren had gifted her with the Ito no wa and coached her through her next few kills, Kagero was hopelessly in love. It was only later, much later, that she'd understood. Ren didn't save her out of kindness. She'd seen potential. A girl who'd already killed twice, who'd lost her sister, who could be molded into something extraordinary. A masterpiece of violence. "I love her," Kagero admitted, the words tasting like ash. "I fucking love her. She's the only mother I've ever really had. She gave me everything. But she also took everything." She met Mika's gaze, her eyes hard. She found me when I was broken, and instead of helping me heal, she sharpened my edges and called it a gift. Mika reached for her again, cupping her face. "You're not broken." "Yes, I am." Kagero's laugh was bitter. "We all are. Every girl in that tea house. We're all fractured pieces of glass, and Ren just arranges us into something beautiful. But we're still glass, still sharp, still empty." Mika leaned closer, her lips nearly brushing hers. "Then let me fill you, just for tonight." Kagero hesitated, wanting to say no, but the heat of Mika's breath was too enticing. "One night," she finally whispered. Mika smiled, pulling her into a kiss that tasted like rain, redemption, and lies they both wanted to believe. The two walked back to the tea house in silence, fingers intertwined, the river behind them flowing dark with secrets. When they reached the door, Kagero paused. "Don't join the Lotus, Mika. Don't become like me." The girl's smile was sad. "Too late. Tonight was my initiation." Mika paused, a coy smile coloring her cheeks. "And you saw for yourself how much I enjoyed it." Kagero sighed. "Then we're both fools." She slid open the door, the scent of jasmine greeting them like a comforting friend. Somewhere inside, Madame Ren was waiting, beautiful, terrible, inevitable. And Kagero would go to her, just as she always did, because the matron had given her everything, even if everything was poison dressed as salvation, even if love was just another word for a perfectly tightened noose. The tea house was quiet when they returned. Most of the girls had already retired to their chambers. Only the Irori hearth flickered in the main room, casting dancing shadows across the tatami mats. Kagero moved to release Mika's hand, but the younger woman held fast. "Stay with me tonight," she begged softly. "Please." Kagero looked away, her gaze flicking towards Madame Ren's bedroom before being caught in the girl's soft but insistent grip. Mika's eyes gleamed as she held her, expressing something that looked dangerously like hope. "Just to sleep," Kagero finally conceded. "Just to sleep," she agreed, though her smile suggested otherwise. Mika's room was small, spare. the quarters of someone who hadn't yet earned luxury. A single futon, a modest trunk, a paper screen painted with fading chrysanthemums. They undressed in silence, shedding their damp kosode. Mika's body was lean, almost boyish, her breasts small and high. Bruises decorated her inner thighs, gifts from the merchant's rough hands. Kagero's fingers traced one, her touch, light as a feather. Does it hurt? Not anymore. Mika caught her wrist, bringing it to her lips. Not when you touch me. Kagero's breath hitched. Mika. I know. The girl guided Kagero's hand to her chest, her delicate buds hardening beneath the touch. You don't love me. You don't love anyone. But let me pretend. Just for tonight. You're asking for a future that doesn't exist. Then give me a present that does. Kagero kissed her, not gently, but not possessively either. It was the kiss of someone who'd forgotten what tenderness felt like, who was trying to remember through another's mouth. Mika responded eagerly, her hands sliding into Kagero's hair, pulling her closer. They sank onto the futon, limbs tangling. Mika's touch was reverent, worshipful, her fingers tracing the scars on Kagero's wrists, her throat, each mark a story she was desperate to read. You're perfect, Mika breathed. I'm broken. Then let me hold the pieces. Kagero closed her eyes, letting the girl explore her body with hands that shook slightly, betraying her mounting desire and unseasoned nerves. When Mika's fingers found the slickness between her thighs, Kagero arched, a soft gasp escaping her lips. Like this, Mika whispered, her touch tentative. Kagero guided her hand, showing her the rhythm, the pressure. More like, this. They moved together in the darkness, soft moans mingling with the sound of rain. And for a moment, just a moment, Kagero finally let go. She let go of the scar around her neck, let go of the sister she mourned, and the beautiful matron she'd given her life to. And in that blissful moment of surrender, Kagero let go of her ghosts. From the shadows beyond the shoji screen, Madame Ren watched. She'd heard them return, of course, had listened to their footsteps pause outside Mika's room instead of continuing to her own chambers. A lesser woman might have felt jealous, betrayed even. The guild's matron, however, felt nothing but overwhelming satisfaction. Her hand slipped beneath her silk hakama, fingers finding her own wetness. She traced slow circles as she watched their silhouettes move against the paper screen, Kagero's lean form covering Mika's smaller frame, their bodies undulating in that ancient rhythm. Yes, Ren thought, her breath quickening. This is exactly what I wanted. Kagero was becoming her, taking a young broken thing and shaping it, offering protection and possession in equal measure. The cycle she'd begun was perpetuating itself, as beautiful and inevitable as seasons turning. Ren's fingers worked faster as she heard Mika cry out, followed by Kagero's quieter, more controlled moan. Her own climax built slowly, a warm tide rising. She remembered teaching Kagero that first time, how the girl had been so hungry for touch, so desperate to be wanted, how easy it had been to make her loyal, to make her hers. Now, Kagero was doing the same to Mika, creating her own weapon, her own successor. And one day, Mika would do the same to another girl, and another, and another. The Crimson Lotus would bloom eternal, each petal nourished by blood and lust and the terrible, beautiful hunger for belonging. Ren's climax washed over her, silent and intense. She steadied herself against the wall, her fingers slick, her breath ragged. Inside the room, the shadows had stilled. She heard murmuring, Kagero's voice, low and almost tender, then Mika's soft laugh. Ren smiled in the darkness, withdrawing her hand and licking the nectar clean. She would let them have tonight. Tomorrow, the guild's work would continue. There would be new contracts, new targets, new girls to train in the art of beautiful violence. But tonight, she would let Kagero believe she'd found something real. Let her believe that her relationship with Mika was different from what she shared with her madam. It wasn't, of course. Love in the Crimson Lotus was just a contract between possessor and possession. Just submission, wearing a pretty face, just a sharp wire wrapped in silk. Kagero would learn that lesson soon enough, Ren knew, just as she had learned it, just as every woman who entered these walls eventually did. Meanwhile, in the pleasure district of a neighboring town, a young girl lay coiled in the fetal position. Her shoulders heaved as tears stained her cheeks. She was barely of age, and her body bore a constellation of scars, illuminated by the light that spilled in as the door to her cell swung open. "Get up," a merchant grunted. She rose, looking to the man eagerly. "Let's see," he began, fingers flipping through his ledger. "You serviced only 3 clients today, and 2 of them complained about your performance, said you didn't show enough enthusiasm." The girl looked down as he continued, knowing what that meant. "So your pay for the night was reduced." The man held out half a rice cookie and a bucket of putrid water, a dank rag swimming within the muck. "Here is your dinner portion, and I suggest you clean yourself up." He glared at her before closing the door to the cell. "Try to do better tomorrow, and maybe you can have a full meal for once." The door slammed shut, the lock clicking into place. She ate her rice cookie with gusto, regretting her quickness before licking the crumbs from her fingers. As she pulled the wet rag from the bucket, applying it gingerly to her fresh bruises, she began to wonder, as she often did, how she got there, and most importantly, who was she? The only thing the girl could remember before the cell was that she was loved once. There was a girl in her life who cared for her, several years older, and with dark, silken hair like her own. Kagero. She whispered the name with reference as she brought the wet cloth to her stained face. A memory crystallized in her mind. A girl with dark hair dabbing a wet rag against her bruised cheek. "There you go, all better," she'd said, even called her by name. What was it? Was it Aiko? The girl's eyes widened in recognition before dulling again. What use is a name in a place like this? She sighed, gaze sweeping across the darkness of her cell. However, she repeated the names once more, tasting the familiarity on her lips. Kagero and Aiko.